Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're here at Turning Point virtually. My name is Panayota Papadopoulos, she, her pronouns. I'm the training and education advocate here at Turning Point. We have our guest speakers today. We're going to be talking about the intersection of domestic and intimate partner abuse with brain injury. So I guess, Stephanie, you're kind of my first in view. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Stephanie Kolakowsky-Hayner. I am the Director of Research and Clinical Outcomes at Good Shepherd Rehabilitation Network and also a certified brain injury specialist trainer. And I'm really happy to be with you guys here today.
Thank you. Melissa.
Yep, my name is Melissa Robinson. I am the Training and Education Director here at Turning Point of Lehigh Valley.
My name is Miriam Rivera. I am the Community Advocacy Director for Turning Point of Lehigh Valley.
Awesome. Before we kind of begin our conversation, just a couple brief housekeeping notes. I do want to note that if you or anyone, is interested ever in some of our other community events or trainings, you can always visit our website at Turning Point Lehigh Valley or turningpointlv.org /events, and then you can view all of our events that are listed. Additionally, after our conversation, a survey will pop up in a separate window. That survey will allow us feedback and anything that we can do to improve, but also will allow you to receive a certificate of completion for attending today's training. So if that's something that you're interested in, just make sure that you complete the survey upon the closure of your window. Last but not least, out of confidentiality and the safety of others, we do ask you to not share any personal or personally identifying information in the chat, but you can always place any questions as we go in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and we will do our best to tackle those as they come through. So if we don't have any questions, I guess, other than that, we'll go ahead and begin. So I guess I first want to start kind of with a baseline, right? Because I know that we're coming at this from a couple different perspectives. We have the counseling perspective, the training perspective, and the research and brain injury perspective. So I guess my first question is, what is brain injury? What does it look like? What causes it?
So I think that brain injury is a variety of different things. It's first of all an insult to the brain that causes a change in brain function. It presents itself in a variety of different ways. It could be headache, confusion, memory loss. It could be physical issues. It could be um, psychiatric issues. There could be depression. There could be anxiety. There could be a number of different things. And once you've seen one brain injury, you've seen one brain injury. Everybody responds differently.
Yeah. What are, I guess, from the opposite perspective, so here at Turning Point, we work through domestic and intimate partner abuse and helping support survivors. So how would you explain what that is to those watching?
So typically, individuals who present at an ER or at a doctor with intimate partner abuse seem to most often have injuries around the head, the neck, or the face. And unfortunately, 36% of individuals who are confirmed victims of domestic abuse have those three types of injuries. And of the people that just report to an ER or emergency department or a physician with head, neck, and face injuries are 7.5 times more likely to be a victim of domestic abuse as well.
Wow, that's crazy. As far as I guess what we do, I don't know if Melissa or Miriam, if you want to break it down a little bit as far as what is domestic and intimate partner abuse, kind of even backing it up further.
Well, with domestic and intimate partner abuse, there is also the issue with the physical assaults and which cause brain injury. And for brain injury, they have mild, moderate, and a severe brain injury. And the most that I see is the mild brain injury, but it's consistent, like reoccurring brain injury. So people who have been unconscious for a short period of time, or show some type of confusion, or a hard time remembering, or that hard time following what you're saying, the information you're giving. So in all of those things, we see so many different effects and symptoms of a brain injury that sometimes we miss. So when it comes to brain injury and domestic violence victims, the ongoing physical trauma and the psychological abuse and the emotional abuse and the sleep deprivation, I mean, all of those things just exacerbate everything. It just makes it worse. So which one do you identify? Because they all are similar.
You make a really good point, Miriam. There are a number of different things that physicians and counselors and people that treat individuals with domestic violence may look for, because it's not just the overt bruises and things. It's neurologic symptoms similar to a head injury that include headache, confusion, and memory loss. Different types of abdominal pain, a loss in appetite, bleeding, different urinary tract infections, things that relate to strangulation, like hoarseness, different problems with your ears. We already talked about the different psychiatric and psychosocial aspects of brain injury. They're similar with individuals who have been abused. They may be restless, they may be combative. And then other things, as we did talk about, the bruising, different wounds, back pain, things like that, also need to be taken into account.
Yeah, and it's crazy too that, through all of this, all of these symptoms, right, they can be easily mistaken as something else. Whether,
Absolutely.
Individually or even in the context of other symptoms, it might be dismissed or minimized as, oh, that's not anything, that's not, or it might be this, so go to this doctor. But then if with it being brain injury, it ends up, kind of being neglected or missed in what they do. With survivors, how do we, I know we talked a little bit, kind of heard you mention like strangulation or physical abuse. What are some of the other things that might cause brain injury in survivors of domestic and intimate partner abuse?
The impact to the head, neck, or spinal cord, causing what's called a coup contra coup injury, where the brain actually bounces within the skull. So if, for example, the injury is to the back of the head directly, we may see some frontal lobe damage from this brain bouncing against the bony prominences within the frontal lobe or front of the skull, and vice versa, depending on where the injury occurs. So we'll see a variety of different presentations due to that.
Any kind of bump, blow, jolt to the head, or any of that penetrating head injury has that potential to cause a brain injury in any survivor. And I think it's oftentimes overlooked, and we don't tend to think about it. Like if a survivor is hitting their head on the ground, if they're getting forced against the wall and they're hitting their head on the wall, all of those instances have the potential to create that brain injury. And what's really hard is a lot of survivors live years going through this abuse and are acquiring multiple brain injuries, where that first one never had time to heal. There's no one throwing in like a red flag, like in a football game when you think of it. No one's throwing in the flag saying, hey, time to take a break from this relationship. You need to let your brain heal. We need to get you back to that base. Like they're living through this consistently every single day, just acquiring more brain injuries, which then those symptoms, like Miriam had said, are exasperated over time.
And it can even be one of those things where, if somebody is pushed and I fall and hit my head on the wall or hit my head on, a hard surface or whatever the case is. It's not necessarily, a direct blow to the head, but any sort of instance that could,
Yep.
kind of what was described. Yeah.
And Melissa had brought up multiple head traumas and similar and you said no one's there throwing the flag, and similar to athletes that are concussed multiple times, we see second impact syndrome in individuals who have been abused, and that causes long-term consequences such as scarring on the brain that may cause memory difficulty, that may cause other issues related to brain injury as well.
You said second impact syndrome? Is that what
Yes.
that's called? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So having multiple injuries, one after the other before the first one is healed.
Do we find in any of your work, do you find that, the clients that you work with recognize it at the start?
At my end,
No.
no, people don't realize how serious the blows to the head or the physical assaults and how serious that is and what the impact that they can have. I have, that's why I'm so glad that we made those cards, because we are able to go and ask people specific questions about, are they feeling dizzy? Are they lightheaded? Do they have like neck pain? Do they, is their memory, has they been affected? Did they see a change in what they're able to keep in mind? Or are they having difficulty remembering things? We're able to ask those questions and then explain how serious that any type of force to the head is and how it affects them. And it also reminds me of that shaken baby syndrome, that also causes brain injury. So sometimes we are dealing with survivors who have experienced some sort of physical abuse or brain injury for a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a good point that, over time, right, how does this impact our brain health? And even just time in general, like how does, the timing of an injury or the age of the client upon injury affect their healing, their growth down the road? Does anybody have any, I don't know, thoughts on that?
Well, I know that for children, it kind of like affects their development, their functioning development, their functional development. Like it affects all of those things that they are developing throughout. The brain don't get to develop their motor skills, their regulating emotions, all of those things are affected by it.
Similarly, in adults, aging with a brain injury, there are studies out there through the traumatic brain injury model systems of care, looking at how individuals with brain injury age and adapt to illness and comorbidities in a different fashion than individuals without traumatic brain injury. And then we talked a little bit earlier about strangulation. And you see things like people post strangulation having similar reactions to those that have other hypoxic brain injuries, lack of oxygen to the brain. So that includes seizures, coma, even death, as well as the regular learning, attention, executive functions, and things like that.
It's interesting you bring up strangulation too, because as you're talking about it, I think about, it not only being used as a tactic of physical abuse, but I think it has also gained traction, in sexual abuse situations as well, especially with younger kids that don't necessarily realize the impact that strangulation can make. So I don't know. I know that Melissa, in one of our trainings, I don't know if you wanna,
I think like even the term strangulation, like even recognizing that choking is the same thing. And I think that's where people tend to not give it the severity that it really deserves. Like choking is strangulation. And yeah, I can speak to, I went into one of the schools and we were having a conversation around strangulation, brain injury, and choking. And a student had raised their hand and they're like, no, that's what they're supposed to do to you. Like they're supposed to choke you. That's what intimacy is. That's, you know, that lets you know that they're a good partner and like it makes the sex better. And not actually realizing that there's real consequences behind it, like long-term consequences, and that you could even potentially lose your life. And they were like literally just stuck in their chair after like kind of knowing those statistics around strangulation and that it is not okay to ever, there's no safe way to really choke somebody, which they were trying to explain to me. Oh, there's a safe way to do it. They showed me a TikTok video where there was a TikTok video that showed the right way to choke your girlfriend. So like these kinds of things, children especially are being, you know, exposed to, and they're thinking that this is factual, but when you really talk with them and explain the consequences of it and how long it can take 4 seconds to even die from somebody strangling you from that lack of oxygen to the brain. It's really alarming for them. So the more education that we can even do at that early age, the better.
Yep.
One of our guests had just posted that happened to her daughter, actually. She was choked and then blacked out by her boyfriend.
I'm so sorry that that happened. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's so easy for that to happen. I think, you know, that we have that approximately 20 pounds of pressure is needed to open a soda can, but only 11 pounds of pressure is on the carotid artery is, you know, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing it. But can cause, you know, strangulation and lose consciousness and potentially, you know, if long enough, can be fatal.
Yeah, it's only 11 pounds of pressure on the carotid artery for 10 seconds is necessary to cause unconsciousness,
Thank you.
whereas 4.4 pounds of pressure on the jugular vein, with any kind of ligature, belt, hands, anything like that can cause unconsciousness and could lead to death within seconds.
Yeah. So and if you think it takes 20 pounds of pressure to open a soda can, you know, it really doesn't take that much. So, you know, yeah, it's scary to think about, but all of this really does lead back to that brain health facet and how, you know, survivors are not necessarily realizing that some of these behaviors, whether consensual really or not, that they could be harmful to their brain health. As far as age, I know that the concept of neuroplasticity comes in, right? Where the younger you are, sometimes it's easier for your brain to sort of bounce back. We did talk about how development might affect that. But how does age or gender affect like the survivor's ability to heal? Does gender play a difference in brain injury?
There are studies looking at gender effects in brain injury and the different, like women are more likely to report than men a brain injury, and they're more likely to report more symptoms and things like that. But I don't know that the work is out there because people often forget that men also are victims of intimate partner abuse. And I don't know that there's that great of detail out there in the literature at this point, looking at gender differences in individuals who have suffered intimate partner abuse.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that this is such a, it's fairly new in the research around intimate partner abuse and the correlation and the connection to brain injury. And so, you know, the more studies that are coming out, the more information we're learning, and the more we can incorporate everybody and make it really inclusive, I think we'll get better data. So just being aware of that, like looking for those studies and trying to participate in them, or other, domestic and intimate partner abuse agencies like participating in those as well. I know we partner with Penn State will send us surveys for different studies that they're coming out with, like sleep studies in relation to brain injury and domestic and intimate partner abuse. And we try to push those out as much as we can because that data is so important.
Yeah. Yeah, but you're right. Even in preparing for this conversation, there really isn't much out there as far as the research and this overlap between survivors and, those going through brain injury. But it is a lot more common than I think people realize. If the statistics are 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men are going through levels of physical abuse by an intimate partner, who's to say that those numbers aren't, just as common? 1 in 3, and I don't know what the statistics are, but yeah, just thinking that if I'm walking down the street and there's 3 women or 4 men, odds are at least one of them has gone through physical abuse. How much more have gone through brain injury and whatnot? Why do you think there is so much of that overlap of brain injury? Do you think it comes down to that power and control level? Why do you think there's an overlap of brain injury with survivors?
I think it has to do with the way in which they're injured.
Mm.
The physicality of the abuse is causing the injuries. And again, we talked about individuals not even knowing that they've incurred a traumatic brain injury. They don't realize that hitting their head that hard or being strangled could lead to something like a brain injury. So there's a lot of underreporting going on.
Also many times when people are being physically assaulted to keep the power and control by their abusive partner, that abusive partner is gaslighting them at the same time. It's making them feel like they're the ones, that something is wrong with them, that they're the ones that need the mental health help, and that they're the ones that need help, that they're the ones that are wrong. So that in itself minimizes for the survivor what they're experiencing. They may be experiencing certain things that have to do with the brain injury that they're thinking that is because there's something wrong with them. And then they're the crazy ones and they're the ones that are wrong. So it kind of like prevents survivors from recognizing that there's something going on, that they actually need help, medical help, that they need to seek that. I would urge any survivor that we have in our audience or anyone that knows anyone to break that silence, to talk to someone, to say something to someone, to call for help, just so that, they can connect with people that can actually help them to sort it out, to help them figure out whether this is a brain injury, or is it that they have been affected in any other way by the abuse.
I think it shows like the importance of screening for medical providers. Like we're talking about medical providers, often it's even overlooked by them. It shows like the importance of asking, do you feel safe at home? Screening for it with every visit, building that relationship with their patients, because you never know when that individual will feel comfortable enough to disclose that, and starting to have those conversations to bring awareness to it. So even on the medical provider's part, like noticing those symptoms, knowing what they are, having those conversations, screening for it at every visit can also help with that instead of it being overlooked or missed.
Yeah.
And Miriam,
I'm so sorry.
No, sorry about that.
No, go ahead.
Miriam had brought up the cycle of violence, and there's something like 75% of women that have a TBI because of domestic violence were abused as children. And I'm assuming, again, you're 1 in 3, 1 in 4, that men must be going through the same cycle of abuse as well.
Yeah.
And, that could, perpetrate the feelings of, oh, I deserve this, or I'm used to this. This is how life is.
Yeah. And it's that, with the cycle of abuse, it really starts out in that honeymoon phase where they can love bomb or make you feel great about yourself. And then over time, it sort of escalates with different comments or isolation or name calling or, minimizing your concerns as you bring them up. And then it kind of, the abuser might come back and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. They might blame it on, alcohol or on substance abuse or on having a bad day or whatever the case might be. They might even minimize, what happened or throw it back on the survivor, like, well, I only did this because you did this first. Right. And then it kind of continues that cycle of escalation over time where it gets really hard to step out of that. And that's why I think on average survivors will often take 7 attempts to leave a situation before they actually choose to step out of that cycle. But yeah, over time it does escalate and it gets worse.
And I think that during those times that a survivor leaves, we need to be able to educate them as to the effects of abuse and to talk to them about TBI. That's why I think that those psychoeducational pieces are so important, to connect them to resources, to, make those referrals to Good Shepherd, or, to make those connections. And while Melissa was talking, I wanted to add about, our medical professionals also need to be mindful before diagnosing anything that is it situational? Is it has to do with the situation that the person is going through? Are they experiencing the effects of trauma? Are they experiencing the effects of TBI and not necessarily a mental health disorder? Because I have seen the effects of TBI and some of the pieces that they look for, some of the symptoms that they look for different mental health illnesses, and they are sometimes the same. So how do they differentiate between the both? Are they looking at situations? Are they actually asking the right questions?
Yeah, and I think with that screening rate aspect too, that I guess my question was going to be, in your experience, when do clients or survivors come to you? Like, when do they start to realize that it might be a brain injury issue?
So that's pretty much up to us. When we're educating, we're doing those educational pieces, that doing that helps. Just as we ask the questions for strangulation, same thing with, have you ever been hit in the head? Have you noticed this? And talk about those symptoms, talk about those things. And sometimes it takes them a while to connect what has happened. But they come back, and the whole thing is letting the survivor know what the effects of abuse are. Many survivors think that they're crazy, that there's something is wrong with them. And what they're doing is they're dealing with the effects of the abuse and normalizing that. Just normalizing that this is a very normal reaction or effect to abuse. Not doing it as there's something wrong with you. This is what has happened to you.
Right.
And these are the effects that you're seeing, and normalizing those things.
We have a guest who is asking, when you say it takes 7 times, on average, 7 times to leave, do you find statistically that pattern continues even in a new partner? In other words, you break up with your current partner, but the next partner is also abusive, whether mentally or physically?
I think that's a great question. And I would say, maybe somebody correct me on this if you know, but I would say it probably depends on the survivor. I think it depends on, early recognition of abusive tactics. Or, if I've grown up in an unhealthy household and I think that these behaviors are normal, I might not realize that it is abusive until, I go through this level of education and kind of unlearning the things that I know as norm. So I think it depends. I don't know if anyone, yeah.
Well, and as we mentioned before, sometimes survivors have never known a healthy relationship. Therefore, how can you have something you've never experienced before?
Mhm.
So talking to survivors about healthy relationships, how to recognize the red flags, like again, doing those educational pieces help survivors to have those tools that they need to actually recognize when a relationship is unhealthy, so that they have a comparison. Like I do the power and control and the equality wheel all the time,
Mhm.
just so that they have something to compare it to. Because how do you know when a relationship is healthy if you never had it?
Mhm.
So it's a matter of us as being the support system to educate, to give them the tools that they need so that they don't repeat the same history, so that they are able to break that cycle of abuse.
I agree with Miriam. It's boundaries. Like teaching boundaries is so hard, even for adults. Like nobody in school is sitting down with you being like, this is what a boundary is. This is what it looks like when people cross it. And this is how we can, enforce our boundaries and appropriately, and what is appropriate. There's unfortunately not those classes. So that education, early intervention is so needed.
Mhm.
And I would add that abusive partners don't tend to show you that side of them right away. It's gradual and it happens over time.
Mhm.
So when you get into the relationship, you're typically seeing the best version of that other person. And then it's like drawing you in. No one's on their like Tinder profile or looking like saying, hey, I really want an abusive person that's going to hit me, cause these things and be these kinds of ways towards me. Like we really genuinely want that connection and love, and we're searching for that other person. And so we tend to think we got that. And then it happens over time, subtly. And before you know it, it could lead to that big incident. You're like, how did I get here?
Mhm.
So it's not as though someone's out there searching for that. But sometimes it just, it tends to happen over time. But again, speaking to Miriam, that education piece of it, being able to see those red flags and being able to really be comfortable with your boundaries and yourself and stopping that before it gets too far is really important.
Yeah, I always think of it as, if I have a deadline that's coming up and I'm, pulled in so many directions and I have all these things going on and I'm very needed and hey, can you come do this? Can you come do that? And then the project finishes and then I'm like, oh, this is what, calm feels like. This is what boring feels like. And, if you haven't had that opportunity to recognize like what self-care looks like, what calm looks like, what safe looks like, it can feel really uncomfortable at the start. And, so again, you're right, it does come back down to that, boundary setting, that early recognition of what is healthy, what isn't healthy, even if it's your norm. I think another big thing that this phrase that a lot of survivors will use when abusive tactics might start is they feel like they're walking on eggshells, right? So I think that gut feeling of like, I don't know what I might say or do that will upset my partner, that might be your cue of like, hey, some boundaries are being crossed. So yeah. I don't
You
know.
do this all day long.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to like talk too much, but so we talked about screening tools, and earlier we mentioned how this this overset. I keep doing this interlap and oversection. That makes sense. Overlap and intersection of topics where it is so new that to my knowledge and understanding, I don't believe that there is even like one agreed upon screening tool for survivors in how to recognize those things. So I don't know if you want to talk about what screening tools do exist for any medical professionals or others that might work with survivors that you might recommend, or how can we help screen for these things?
I don't know that there are any screening tools for domestic abuse per se. I know, like, for example, there's a screening tool for traumatic brain injury, which is the Ohio State's traumatic brain injury TBIID identification tool. That's very widely used for identifying traumatic brain injury,
Mhm.
but I don't know of anything that widely used for identifying domestic abuse.
Mhm.
So there's the HITS screening, the HELPS screening. There's one called the HEART. And then Ohio does have their own, Ohio State had created their own identification when working with survivors of domestic and intimate partner abuse, which is the one I believe you're referring to, Stephanie. It's more to screen for that traumatic brain injury or a brain injury in general.
Right.
Versus domestic and intimate partner abuse. That's a whole different kind of area of things. But it's really just to see if there's that potential for the brain injury, any one of those screenings.
Right.
And to get people that early intervention and to get them over to medical services. It's
Mhm.
not meant to diagnose anybody. It's just really just screen to see if there's any potential for that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's the important part to remember too, is that we are not necessarily diagnosing. We are not trying to rescue, right? We are just trying to provide the resources so that the appropriate professionals can kind of continue that process with them. We mentioned a little bit of, physical or behavioral symptoms that might show up on a screening tool, or in survivors, but just, I guess, to reiterate with the concept of screening tools, are there specific ones that, stand out, especially that might be good for, our viewers to look for?
Nothing that I could think of off the top of my head as far as intimate partner violence goes, but I agree with Melissa. Some of those brain injury screening tools have questions that you can pull out that are clear. However, again, if you're looking at a brain injury screening tool,
Mhm.
you're not capturing all of the other possible physical or emotional or psychological symptoms of domestic abuse.
So we at Turning Point, we use the HELP screening.
Mhm.
And there's a series of questions that goes along with it. And like I said, it's really meant to ask those questions to see if there's a potential for a brain injury so that we can make that referral. And we do that with every survivor that we're working with. We don't necessarily have to ask those questions like how they're listed on the HELP screening. Sometimes that information is freely given. If we know that they've been hit in their head before, if we know those things have happened, we don't necessarily need to ask those questions. We don't want to re-traumatize anybody. But we learn those things, right? We learn them over time. Sometimes it may not come out right away, and it may come out in different sessions, like with Miriam as a counselor. And then we can start to have those conversations as we learn more about that individual as well.
Mhm.
Some of the things that come up for me that I have noticed is that unable to pay attention for a limited amount of time, or that their attention span for a short period of time. I have someone that I meet for 20 minutes, sometimes 25 minutes. Those are our sessions. That's as much attention as she could pay for that time. And I need to be very mindful on her concentration, the speed in which people process information. Maybe slower. The delay in understanding certain concepts or new ideas, the delay in processing, problem holding several thoughts at once. Sometimes you just bringing them back to focus on one thing, and just bringing people back to just focus on that one thing at hand, to help them to be able to put some of the pieces together. Sometimes introducing information in different ways,
Mhm.
whether it's written or, a handout or a discussion or a video, whatever it may be, sometimes in doing that. But a lot of the times people don't recognize their own behaviors, and they have difficulty in regulating emotions. And I know that those are some of the things that I see during individual sessions, during interactions, even in support groups. I see all of those things, and I've learned to recognize with time that all of those things are signs that something is going on, that there is an issue. So yeah, with survivors, I think that in order to be able to recognize someone who is in a domestic abusive situation, the fear, a lot of the times the isolation, that they don't accept invites from the community, or that they are interrupted 10, 15 times on a phone or with a text from their partner. The reactions that they have when the phone rings or when the text comes, the constant, that startle response, that being anxious. There is a person that can have a smile in their face, but there is no light in their eyes.
Right.
Their eyes are not, their demeanor is not saying the same thing. Just being mindful of that. Sometimes a very outgoing person all of a sudden becomes very isolated. Being mindful of any changes like that. Sometimes wearing inappropriate clothing for the weather, like long sleeve stuff during the summertime. Sometimes they're trying to cover bruises, sometimes not having a coat when they go out. We recently had a woman again who showed up on one of the groups. She had no coat on, but she couldn't get out of the house with the coat. So because she couldn't stay out there too long, therefore she wasn't allowed to take the coat. So just being mindful of those things. That there are some signs, some signals that people give you. Just being present when you're meeting with someone, being present with them so you can pay attention.
I think you touched on a lot of this, but when we talk about supporting survivors, supporting clients in both of these circumstances, I think being trauma informed is incredibly important, right? And recognizing that we don't want to further traumatize the individual, but also being aware that some of these responses can be both trauma, can be brain injury, right? Or can be a combination and a nice little, mix of everything. So do you have any advice or suggestions on how to be more mindful and more trauma informed for clients that come to you? Whether brain injury or survivors or both.
You mean information to survivors or?
Right. So how can we
responses in a trauma-informed way?
How can we respond in a more trauma-informed way, especially with survivors that might be coming to us with brain injury, right? Where they have this kind of double whammy of complications.
Compassion. Just having compassion. Being present with that person, not having a judgmental attitude. Not blaming them for what is going on with them, but letting them know that this is what's happening. These are the effects. Being able to, be yourself. Survivors pick up on whether you're being real. Being always the same. No matter how they act, no matter what they do, no matter what they say, always stay the same. Being respectful, regardless of how they react. Sometimes survivors react in anger. That's how they're dealing with what they have experienced. Sometimes that is a defense mechanism, but once you get past that, you can see the fear that they're experiencing. The mistrust, the hypervigilance, being able to stay neutral and know that your face and your words, your body language need to match. If it doesn't, he'll pick up on it. So just being mindful of those things and being sincere. Don't make any promises. Being honest, being gentle when you're introducing, and you're talking to them about, their trauma. You're talking to them about their experience and you're pointing out or you're educating
Mhm,
being gentle in doing that, being mindful in the way that you're coming across,
mhm,
that giving them information so that they can make their own decisions.
mhm.
And knowing that survivors with TBI, a lot of the times people think that they don't want to do anything to improve their situation, or they're not compliant because they're not showing up for their appointments. Well, give them tools to remind them.
Mhm.
Give them a call that they have an appointment. Remind them that they have that.
Being more sensitive to that need.
Absolutely, absolutely. Being sensitive to those needs, and remember that this could happen to anyone,
Mhm,
even including the people that you love and care about.
mhm.
And it also, you just brought up an excellent point. It might not be the memory issues of forgetting appointments. It could also be the initiation problems due to frontal lobe injuries that occur. So it's not that individuals with that have survived domestic abuse are not interested, or that have a TBI, or both are not interested in getting the help that they need. It's that they don't have the initiation capacity due to the frontal lobe injuries.
Yeah.
And we had talked a little bit before about screening tools.
Mhm.
I did find 3 that are specific to abuse
Okay.
and intimate partner violence. One is called, for those professionals that are listening in, one's called the Partner Violence Screening Questionnaire,
Mhm.
and it's an interview-based questionnaire specific for intimate partner violence. The hurt, insulted, threatened, or screamed at instrument. And then the last one is the Women Abuse Screening Tool. So I don't have any research on any of those, but they were all developed specifically as interviews for intimate partner violence.
So maybe we can drop those in the chat or send them to anyone who might be interested afterward.
Or absolutely.
Yeah. I wanted to also highlight, because I know this often comes up. And if viewers have any questions while we're going through, please feel free to just type them in and we'll kind of hit them as we go, because I know we have about 15 minutes left. But just so recognizing some of the symptoms that might show up, right? We talked about lack of focus. We talked about lack of initiation. Sometimes even things like slurred words or trouble, piecing information together. A lot of times brain injury can even look like intoxication, right? So in a situation where law enforcement or medical staff or, another professional is coming into the situation, how can we better advocate for survivors where they might be quickly dismissed for these brain injury symptoms? I know that's a bigger societal picture and conversation that might be.
I think it comes down to education and really trying to show up and have those relationships in the community and educate. And, early intervention, really working on that prevention piece, especially with the youth inside the schools, and giving them those tools and opportunities early on to help, further prevent in the future.
I agree.
Waiting to see if anyone had any.
Agree. Education, absolutely. Being able to talk about this, to have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
It's like mental health. Like everybody, there's such a stigma attached to mental health. Like, don't talk about it. That's something that stays behind closed doors. It's very shameful. We've been taught that, but there's real power in that conversation and making sure people feel that comfortability. Even just hearing somebody else's story, you'll see a ripple effect. When one person shares, somebody else will be like, oh my gosh, I had a similar experience. Or when I was this age, I had this experience.
Right.
And that conversation starts. So even taking away that stigma that's attached to domestic and intimate partner abuse, because we do know 1 in 3 women go through it, 1 in 4 men, like it's very common. Start to have that conversation, build in those educational components, like get to know who your local agency is, get some trainings, get some information, and start to talk about that. I think you can start to see real change start to happen. It's not going to be overnight, but it's a start.
And it alleviates a lot of that shame and
Yeah.
isolation that already comes with, I think, being a survivor.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
do you,
I think that our community also needs to stop thinking about the abuse. It's somebody else's problem.
mm,
We need to own it as a community. We need to make it our issue, all of our issue, not just those that work with the victims, but this is a community issue. We are losing out on gifts and talents that people have,
mhm,
but they are being tortured and abused behind closed doors and sometimes in front of community members.
mhm.
So owning it and speaking about it and speaking against it and not allowing it to happen, that's how this is gonna end. There is no other way. We all need to be involved.
Not just being that passive bystander, but
Absolutely.
with any sort of recognition of, hey, this seems like there might be something else going on here, whether it be a brain injury, whether it be a survivor, whether it be both, you know, just, hey, are you okay? Hey, starting that conversation where, you know, sharing that resource or educating on what you know, hopefully something that you learned from today. Do you have any strategies or techniques you might recommend to help survivors cope with their brain injuries?
Peer support, I
Mhm.
think, is a huge um, tool
Mhm.
that individuals can use. You know, really getting to know what others have been through and how they've overcome similar situations to whatever you're going through with your brain injury.
Mhm.
And that isn't just peer support for individuals with the brain injury, but it's also for their care partners. Having a group to turn to, or even just a significant an individual who's been down the same path that you're about to go down,
Mhm.
or has experience in similar things to what you're experiencing due to the brain injury or due to being the care partner of an individual with a brain injury. And
Mhm.
I would assume that's similar to survivors of domestic abuse as well, having that peer-to-peer, one-to-one support, having someone to listen. That's a huge aspect of you know, being able to share your experiences and feel heard. I think that's a really big stepping stone.
Right. Yeah.
You know, also assisting to create some type of organization, you know, providing survivors with folders. They can organize things, a calendar, a highlighter, and notebook where they can write down questions or things they need to do just as a reminder. Sticky notes are great for them to put in places where they see it that reminds them that they need to do something at a certain point. It's a matter of helping to create a daily goal plan, like just one thing at a time, and delineate the steps, all the steps that they need to take to actually reach that goal that they have for that day.
Not
Like
trusting
helping
the
them
information. Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. That is a way that we can help.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
So, oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to just say being present, like really being able to pick up on subtle cues, like is the light too bright? Like possibly being able to dim a light. If noise is being distracting, trying to find a quieter place for, you know, to meet with individuals. If you're able to incorporate fidget toys, sometimes that's good for distraction and they're able to focus a lot more. Like
Absolutely.
even those subtle things that we tend to overlook, if you're present in that session or when you're working with somebody or even with family, anybody really, and you can start to pick up on those subtle cues, I think then we can start to, you know, incorporate different things based off of what that individual needs.
Thank you guys so much. I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts, whether in regards to this conversation or in regards to things that you might want others to know about the work that you do. Any final thoughts for us?
I just want to thank Turning Point for putting this together today. I think it's an extremely important topic, and I'm really honored to have been a part of it. So thank you so much.
We're
Thank
happy
you
to
for
have had
being
you. And, you know, the partnership with Good Shepherd, period, right? I know that we work very frequently together. So, you know, we're very grateful for you guys as well and all the work that you're doing research-wise and just supporting our survivors. So thank you.
Thank you.
You can always contact our training and education team. We do have brain injury rack cards available that you can put out into the community, have one on hand. You can stop into our admin building and pick up some, or you can reach out, like I said, to our training and education team, which is in the chat. You can reach out to the training at turningpointlv.org and request them, and we can get them dropped off to as well. We will have them available in both Spanish and English.
And it provides that sort of questionnaire for survivors, just providing that recognition of this overlap.
Can help you start the conversation too.
Yeah. So Miriam, any final thoughts?
Thank you for doing it. I think that we certainly needed to have this conversation. I'm glad to have been able to meet Stephanie. You know, and just, like I said, don't ignore it. Give people at least Turning Point's helpline number. We'll take it from there. Give us a call. If you know anyone and you don't know what to do, give us a call. We can help you, guide you through that. We can provide support for you as well. So just knowing that nobody's alone with this. We're here.
Thank you. We do have a training specifically on traumatic brain injury or brain injury coming up. So again, that is on our website, on our events calendar. But if you have any interest in materials, in further trainings, feel free to just contact us at training@turningpointlv.org and we'll get that out to you. Thank you again so much. If you wouldn't mind filling in the certificates, what am I saying? The survey afterward for if you're interested in a certificate. And again, thank you guys. Thank you to our panelists. Appreciate your feedback and insights, and hopefully this is the start of, you know, more conversations around this topic because it's definitely needed. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you. And yeah, we'll see you soon. Stay safe.
Thanks.
Thank you.